It's a little fuzzy, but let me start it, please, this way. Adriana is going to give a presentation today. Before that, I want to correct my misquotation from the short poem by Dorothy Parker that I mentioned last week. You'll remember it when I finished reading you the authentic version, which reads, "Oh, life is a glorious cycle of song, a medley of extemporanea, and love is a thing that can never go wrong. And I am Maria of Romania." That's what I was trying to remember. And as I mentioned, Maria of Romania was the queen of that country at that time. So you get the idea that the speaker is a little confused in her mind. You remember the context when Veronica was talking about love, which can have various virtues without, at the moment, discussing all of the drawbacks. All right, today Adriana's going to take over, so why don't you start now? And do you mind being interrupted or not?
No, not at all.
That applies to the rest of you as well as me.
Okay, so we read 2 chapters from The Pursuit of Love. We read the chapter on sexual love and the chapter on love and society. So first I would like to make some comments on the chapter of sexual love. You didn't go very deep into the concept of sexual love in the religious aspect, so I would like to elaborate a little bit on how this evolved.
Entirely fitting, but for next week you'll be reading a chapter called Religious Love.
Yeah, this is just...
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. In fact, maybe it's better for you to try out your own ideas before you read that chapter.
So first of all, Aristotle derived the term philia from Plato's Eros, and he redefined love as something that is more dependent on reason than on passion.
What than passion?
More dependent on reason than on passion.
But what does the idea of philia refer to?
More like friendship.
Friendship, that's the big difference.
It actually means friendship in Greek.
Still, Rose, say it again?
It actually means friendship, exactly.
Yes, exactly, right. As in philanthropic, a friendly sort of relationship, not necessarily a passionate one at all. Though there are some people who have a passion for philanthropy, but that's, you see, a complication.
But my point here is that then philia gave rise to agape in Christian philosophy, and in this concept, erotic love is repressed, and what is emphasized is the union of the souls.
Okay. I think at this point I should interrupt for one of my mini lectures that I hope you'll help me to keep short. In the trilogy, The Nature of Love, talking about Christian love, there are several hundred pages on Christian love, I distinguish among 4 different concepts that applied, all of the words coming from the Greek. Not all of the ideas did, but the words did. The words are love as eros, and I'll explain that to you, love as philia, love as nomos, and love as agape. Agape you've already encountered in this book, haven't you?
Yes.
All right. I say love as, but the truth is that the medieval system of thought was inherently a synthesis. And this idea of the synthesis of these different properties of love, or ingredients in love, then became part of the controversy that erupted in the Reformation and the schism between the Catholics and the Protestants. And that has never been overcome because there became more and more Protestants, different sects, but the idea of there being one kind of Christianity, I don't think anyone can affirm anymore. There may be ecumenical efforts to communicate, there may be a sense of identity as Christians, but still they are different sects. And that's related to the question of the synthesis among those four ingredients of medieval love, which still exist as ingredients in Catholic theology. Follow me? All right. The first one, eros. Eros, as Adriana just pointed out, is a Platonic idea, and it refers to the way in which the human soul is always striving to improve itself, to make itself better. Why? Because Plato thought that that's in the nature of the universe. Everything wants to be better. Nobody wants something that is inferior. Given a choice between something that's good and something that's best, everybody wants what's best. That applies not only in advertisements for automobiles and food at home, but also in terms of the nature of the self, the soul. The soul always wants to improve itself, to make itself better and better and better. It's striving for perfection, and that's built into everything in the universe according to Plato, and most evident and most interesting in human beings. Why? Because human beings are created in the image of God, and God is perfect. God not only is perfect, but it's part of the tradition, the Christian tradition, that God is perfection, and also that God, since he is perfect, loves himself. Now that sounds as if there's some kind of solipsism or some kind of selfishness being wrapped up in yourself, or narcissism, I guess. Like, remember the Greek myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own image. The idea is that God is spiritually perfect, and consequently, falling in love with himself, or being in love with, not falling in love, because that's a separate concept, remember, in my analysis, but love for perfection is a manifestation of the spiritual purity that is true in God in a way that it's not true in anybody else. And yet that's what we strive for in loving God. Dimitri, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Well, you said that according to Plato, love is the pursuit of perfection. So
well,
how could a perfect being be in pursuit of perfection or love?
That's a very big problem in Plato. On the Platonic view, which was not uncommon at that time, the gods didn't love because they were perfect. To love is to seek for something better than yourself, something outside yourself, which will make you better. But if you are already perfect, there is no place for there to be love. So the traditional view was that the gods did not love because they were already perfect. The mythological source is in the sort of mythological character of the god called Eros, who is the god of love, the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And the point about Eros is that he is always wayward. He's very imperfect. He is an individual who will shoot his arrows of desire wherever he feels like. He's a kind of rogue, a kind of gigolo. You might even think of him as a kind of Don Juan, who will simply, for reasons of his own, cause people to fall in love. Not because he is makes them better, but because that is in his nature. Right? All right. Now Plato picks this up and says that this typifies the way in which only an imperfect person could love. And love in the sense of striving to attain something that is better rather than what one is or worse than what one is. The gods being perfect, they're different from Eros, and they don't love. They're the object of love. Mortals, inferior, imperfect creatures like us want to emulate the gods to be like them, right? 2,000 years later, Nietzsche says in one place, if the gods are perfect, how can I not want to be one of them myself? I want, in other words, to be God. And then Sartre picks this up and says that the futility of the human race is that all men and women, all people, want to be perfect. But there is only one creature, entity who can be perfect, and that's God, with a capital G now, because it's 20th century. And Nietzsche concludes, but God does not exist. And therefore, the human search to be God, which a devout religious person would call blasphemous, that search, according to Sartre, is futile. And so humanity is futile. That's Sartre, going far beyond Nietzsche, and Nietzsche playing upon this idea of imperfect creatures searching to be like the perfect ones, but the only perfect ones being the gods or God. Dmitry, again, you want to say something?
Yeah, I can see this argument, but certainly it doesn't mean that you can't get much better than you are.
The real question is whether you can truly emulate God, because God belongs to a different domain. He is inherently perfect and we're inherently imperfect. He is immortal and we're immortal. All sorts of ways in which God is infinite in his goodness, his wisdom, his power, and we are finite. And the fact that you want to be like that doesn't change the nature of the human condition. That's the problem. We don't have to go through this into too much detail to try to resolve it. I wanted to make this little bypass to explain the concept in medieval Christianity, which is the concept of eros. The great thinker who interprets the Christian religion in terms of eros is St. Augustine. And I have a lot of discussion of him in the first volume of the trilogy. The whole first volume of the trilogy, the part that deals with Christianity, which is over 200 pages, works at this analysis into the four ingredients and the question of whether they can be synthesized or not. So if you're really interested in detail, go back to the first volume of the Love Trilogy. St. Augustine's idea comes directly out of Plato. He was originally a pagan, growing up to be a Platonist, and then he saw the word, heard the word of God, and had a revelation, sort of, and converted to Christianity. His mother was a Christian. His father was a pagan, and there was this conflict with him. He finally became not only a Christian, but also a very prolific writer and theologian and bishop, and finally he was sanctified as he was canonized as a saint. And so St. Augustine is one of the pillars of the Catholic faith. His dominant idea is that all human beings, all Christians, are defined in terms of their erotic love of a spiritual sort, the search to approximate the perfection of God. That was the big emphasis in him. Now, and it came out of Plato. Aristotle deals with a problem that Dmitri brought up in a very late dialogue. Plato raises the problem, but he doesn't do anything about it. The problem is that if love is perfection, it's the best condition one can imagine, meaning by that the love of the highest forms, the good, the beautiful, which Christianity interpreted as God, divinity, then Plato says, how is it possible that loving that should not be a perfection in itself? So the whole question of love consisting for a search for perfection, but love not being perfect, is raised in that dialogue of Plato's, but he doesn't resolve it. Aristotle does resolve it. Aristotle says it is because love is a perfection that anybody who searches for the best will also experience and embody the nature of love. So that makes a sharp change from Plato. Aristotle didn't write very much about the panorama of loves. There's hardly any discussion of sexual love or love between friends marching together, as in Plato, in their search for the good. But he does have a very important chapter in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, on the nature of friendship. And he defines friendship as a kind of love, but it's a kind that is at its best when you have two virtuous individuals, that is, two people who are inherently good, morally good, and that'll be, he thinks, among those who are fully developed in their rationality. So that this gets back to the point Adriana was making about love for Aristotle being a form of reason. To that extent, emotions, passion, all of which are throbbing in Plato. Plato is really almost a romantic poet. He was a great writer, a literary writer. The search for the good, could bring about what he called the divine madness, in which you lose your reason because you're transported into a different realm. And you can see 19th century Romanticism learning a great deal from Plato. In Aristotle, you don't get much of that, but you get a really very interesting analysis about different kinds of friendship. I don't want to get into it right now. There's a chapter on Aristotle in the first volume, and a long chapter on Plato. And the one kind that I want to emphasize is the idea of philia being friendship among people who are alike in their virtuous search for the good and who live together in a community. So Aristotle is almost a political theorist when he talks about love, that love is a way of unifying the city-state and being managed properly by the people who are capable of being friends and who know the difference between right and wrong. It's almost a constitutional view about the nature of love. And in fact, Aristotle did write constitutions for a large number of city-states throughout the Greek Empire. That's philia. Medieval Christianity appropriates that. And in the first years of Christianity, first century, second century AD, there were little societies communes, as we would call them, since like the communes of 1960, in which men and women would live together in a loving friendship. One problem is, what did love involve? Do you have to subjugate all of your physical desires, your sexual desires? Was this free love among Christians? A lot of them seem to have bordered on that or even turned into that, and they were considered heretical, and thousands of them were murdered by those who thought that wasn't good Christianity. There were all the Crusades against the Albigensians, against the Cathars and other people on the grounds that they desecrated the Christian religion. They were sort of too friendly to each other. But then there were others who, like in a nunnery or monastery or a Christian commune, subjugated, conquered their sexual desires and lived together as brother and sister or as intimate friends within Christ. The idea of philia, therefore, was being applied by them, and it continued as an important element in Christian ideas about the nature of love, of religious love. Stavros.
Oh, yeah. So is that the reason why monasteries are all men, or did it originate from those communes?
Well, I think the upshot of that conflict was the need to separate the sexes in order to keep the devout believers purified. At the same time, the Church, of course, recognized that there wouldn't be any future generations unless something of that sort went on, and so they made a big thing about the sanctity, the sacrament of marriage. So in marriage, what you could not do outside was not only free and recommended, it was part of the beauty of marriage, which is, I always think, is a very great anomaly, particularly nowadays when marriage is crumbling all around. Why can't you do outside of marriage what you're encouraged to do inside of marriage? Well, this is something we can come back to. Philia, then, is the second ingredient of the Catholic synthesis in the Middle Ages. The third ingredient doesn't come from Greek philosophy. It comes from the other parent of Christianity, which is Judaism. In the Old Testament, there is the idea of God's law, and man being ordained to be willing to submit to God's law. Not doing it grudgingly, but doing it with a good will, doing it lovingly, and that their love would show itself in living up to God's commandments and God's laws. So that was the third ingredient. The fourth ingredient is agape. Agape is God, because agape is God's love, and God is defined as love, and that involves what I call in the chapter in the first volume, the divine bestowal. God bestows love upon the world, first in creating it out of nothing. No reason why there had to be a world, and no reason why there had to be human beings. This was a bestowal of God's goodness in creating this beautiful world as it used to be, and allowing people to enjoy life as they sometimes still do try to do. Second bestowal occurs when God, seeing how weak and feeble morally and spiritually people are, how sinful they are, he nevertheless, instead of just wiping them off the face of the globe, he sends his own Son. And the meaning of the word son is metaphoric. It refers to a second person, as it's called. Now, for me, all of this language is very hard to understand, and I'm not sure that it is really understandable. In what sense is Christ something like a son? And if Christ is the second person of God, what is the meaning of person anymore? One thinks of the pagan image of Janus with the faces, pointing in different directions, two-faced creature, but it's more complicated than that. And then the third person is the Holy Ghost, which sometimes is now called the Holy Spirit. Now, the point about the Holy Spirit is that it itself is defined in terms of God's agape. It itself is the purity of his bestowal upon the world. However we interpret the three persons that God is, since Catholicism is Trinitarian, and of course later Protestant sects will not be, and Judaism was not. The second bestowal of goodness upon the world occurs when he sends his own Son, for God hath sent his own Son to save the world. Save the world from what? From its own sinfulness. So Christ dies as a way of taking away the sins of humanity. One can always say, why? How does that happen? Why, just because Christ dies, how are the sins taken away? How can you erase reality? What occurs is infinitely unerasable, because it is what it is. It happened. That sin existed. So how can you erase it? All of this is a mystery that the theologians agree cannot be fully understood to our feeble minds, but it's part of the dogma. So I won't try to make too much sense out of that. For me, and then finally, the third kind of bestowal is that when the sinners die, they aren't all thrown into hell. God tries his best to be merciful and to spare as many as possible, and that is part of the function of Christ, and he intervenes with his mother, but there can't be a spiritual mother. God doesn't have a wife. It's the mother of Jesus, in whose person Christ appears, and then somehow she becomes more than just a saint, kind of goddess, in fact. And he people can intervene with her to be spared and to get favors, to have mercies performed, and so will Christ. All of this being a third illustration of God's infinite bestowal upon the world. In the book, I present all of this as sympathetically as I can, because, as I keep saying, being a philosopher means trying to help people to make their ideas clear. It's not going around with a kind of intellectual machete cutting down all of the people who don't agree with you. That's the way you can get to be a professor, but it's not true to the spirit of philosophy. Why then do I pay so much attention to this? Because for me, it's all magnificent mythology. It's all a beautiful picture of the world. Beautiful not in the sense that the world is shown to be beautiful, but rather because the doing of it is beautiful. The act is beautiful. It's an artistic, conceptual, artistic feat to think of the world in terms of these categories and in terms of these different ingredients. And I'm fascinated by that, but I'm also fascinated being pluralistic and not, I'm not faithful to any one religion. I love them all, and they're all different, and there are many more that aren't religious at all, and I feel the same way about them. At least I aspire to that. Later in the course we may get to that. I'll just briefly mention that that's what I mean by having the love of love, or the love of the love in everything. That then becomes for me, as it did for George Santayana, whom I mentioned to you, and others, becomes the basis of a humanistic, non-theistic religion, very different from the established religions, but it's the equivalent of a religion. That being my motive, what I want to do is to stand Christianity on its head, or if I'm right, stand it on its feet, by saying these ideas of bestowal are simply expressions, metaphoric versions of something that human beings do, not just God. All of love can be understood in terms of a system of bestowal, and then having got that, I then contrast bestowal with appraisal. Having made the contrast, I then try to show the harmonization between bestowal and appraisal. And then after that, there are other distinctions, and the matter gets to be more and more complicated, as you'll see when you get to the book called Explorations in Love and Sex. my first acquaintance with the idea of agape, of God's bestowal, came to me in a great work by a Protestant bishop, the Bishop of Lund, whose name was Nygren. I forget now what his first name was. Anyhow, Nygren. And the book is called Agape and Eros. And it's a marvelous history of Western Christian philosophy from the point of view of the two ways of thinking entering into the thought of Christians. That's where I got the idea, the Christian idea of bestowal, and then not being a devout believer like Nygren, I wanted to see how this could be an expression of the mythologizing, idealizing aspect of human nature. Then I had to explain what it was to idealize, how imagination comes into it, and so on. All of that derives out of this early exploration for me. All right, so here we have the four concepts. I'm sorry this is so lengthy, Adriana. You will have all the time you want very shortly. The four concepts of eros, philia, nomos, and agape. The great genius of the Catholic world was St. Thomas Aquinas. In books, more than, I don't know if one call them books, it's sort of monuments like Summa Theologica, the highest summation of theology, in the I guess the 14th century is when he lived, right? Am I right? Or was it wasn't the 13th? He formulated what became the basis of all subsequent Catholicism, and central in that was the idea that God is all of these, that all of these are Christian concepts, and they are entirely compatible. They are synthesized, and he created a synthesis by welding them into each other, right? All right. In the case of Luther, now we're jumping to the Reformation, Luther couldn't believe all four of them. He thought that God was agape. For him, that was the basis of Christianity. But eros, he thought of, no matter what St. Augustine said, is selfish. It's somebody wanting to get better, something better. So given a choice between a lesser spiritual good, which is what human beings would have, and a better, higher spiritual good, which is what divinity would have, God, then a lusty, selfish man will try to make himself better so that he can get the best there is. Nobody wants an inferior thing, but that's selfishness, according to Luther. He was originally in his life in an Augustinian monastery, and he lost his faith in Catholicism there. He went through all of the rituals, self-flagellation, and all of the very difficult hardships that were supposed to purify oneself of the longings of the flesh, make one more and more spiritual, and he suffered in the proper manner. But he writes, the more I did that, the more I realized that how sinful I was because of my desire to do that. I couldn't eliminate that. And why? Well, if I did eliminate that, if I did the job properly, the way I'm being trained in the monastery, I'd become a saint. But for the wrong reasons. And there's one line I've always remembered from his description of those days. He said, I concluded, oh devil, the devil, you'll make a saint of me yet, won't you? that there was something infinitely sinful and evil in the very idea of anybody wanting to make himself into a saint. If you become one, it's not because of anything you do, it's because of God's grace. God's grace is outflowing from his agape, his bestowal of love, and your striving to get it is no better than your striving to make a fortune or to make love to a very large number of women. All of that is evil. It's a kind of spiritual evil as opposed to more material evils. On that basis, Luther began by separating Eros out of Christianity, and living up to the laws, and he thought that was the reason why the Jews were finally dismissed by God, and a new religion had to be created, because you would live up to the laws inevitably out of obedience, not out of love. So that took care of nomos. Philia was a little better, but not much, because you could have a society of robbers or murderers or sinners. So just the friendship among people who are imperfect doesn't yet bring one into the religious condition one wants. The only thing that would be agape, but man can't have agape, and therefore the life on earth, human nature, is evil inherently. And the Lutherans nowadays really seem to believe that. I don't know if any of you listen to Prairie Home Companion on radio. Is that not a popular thing to you? For all of you? It's on all the public broadcasting stations at the same time Saturday at 6 o'clock. When I'm in New Hampshire, because where I happen to be located, I'd pick up about 6 or 7 different public broadcasting stations. Albany, Amherst, Boston, and 2 in New Hampshire, all of them. And at 6 o'clock, they all play this thing because it's so popular. And the master of ceremonies, who is very famous, but whose name I've now forgot. What is his name? You don't know. In any event, he has a monologue about life in his hometown, which is a fictional place somewhere in Minnesota, called Lake Wobegon. Now the name itself. And it's where everybody is a Lutheran, and all being Lutherans, they're all sure of their own sinfulness, that everything they do is tainted. And since presumably he's a Lutheran, and he's very comical, it's done with a good spirit, and nobody seems to think this is a kind of Lutheran baiting. But the point is that goes back to Luther's belief that human nature is inherently evil. He doesn't give up, however, because God, being infinitely good, bestows his love upon the world, and rewards those who have faith in him, not for their good deeds, because if you do good deeds you're scheming, but rather because it's God's grace which can fall on anybody without the person knowing about it. So you have a very different conception from St. Thomas Aquinas's. All right? And that results in the splitting of the synthesis. Now that's what those pages of mine are about, the creation of the synthesis and the splitting of the synthesis. When the first volume came out, I thought, I was doing a good philosophical job. My colleagues, the American philosophers, would recognize the brilliance of my analysis, and the historian would see how insightful I was as a historian of ideas, but I was afraid the religious people would be horrified at my standing their religion on its head and then chopping it up and, for the sake of this argument that I was developing. I was completely wrong. The philosophers completely ignored it, and the religious people thought there was something of interest. And nowadays, I think that's still the case, that it has a fair reputation among whereas other books of mine have been totally neglected. But I think mainly by people who take religion seriously. They didn't mind the fact that I was an outsider, a humanist. So I'm happy to have been of service to that extent. Though I'm sorry that philosophy has gone off in its own wayward manner. Adriana, have you forgotten everything that you wanted to say?
No.
Not really. I hope I haven't deterred you.
No.
Then let's go back. You were saying about eros, philia.
Yes, and well, you already talked about what I was going to say about how St. Augustine made the distinction between the body and soul based on Plato's dichotomous view of the world, and he praised the soul and disdained the body. So Christianity takes this and gives rise to Christian and Catholic morals and derives the concept of sin from disdaining the body.
Good.
And I just wanted to mention that because this is the reason why sometimes sexuality is treated as sort of a taboo topic, and it wasn't mentioned on that chapter, so I just wanted to mention.
Well, this is worth developing. Does anyone want to say anything about that? Stavros?
I think why sexuality is considered a taboo by Christians is because it was a pagan. They wanted to, make pagans. They didn't want to have pagan traits in their religion, and pagans used to have, in ancient Greece, these big orgies, and sex and loving of the woman was part of the whole pagan religion. So Christians, in their effort to try to shun paganism, made sex a taboo and made the woman inferior to man.
I think that may have been a second idea, because even if you shun sex, doesn't make women inferior. The point,
I was just...
There were goddesses, fertility goddesses among ancient people, and maybe that was thought to be competitive with the one God that Christianity believed in.
Mm-hmm.
But they could just as easily have said that sex is bad because of the men as well as because of the women. In terms of the history of the different versions of Christianity, Catholicism has always been much friendlier to sexuality than Protestantism until the 20th century. I think in the last 100 years, or maybe that was part of the influence of 19th century Romanticism, which we haven't got to yet, really. The analysis of the origin of 19th century Romanticism out of Christian religion, haven't touched on. I don't think I go into it much in this book. There are hundreds of pages on that in the second volume. I'll spare you that today. We'll come back to it. But in recent times, there have been Protestant sects that say God is love, and the nature of our Christianity is to try to emulate God and to establish a loving communion with other people. So there are ideas of philia, but they don't say the way they did in the 17th century or 16th century that sex itself is bad. They say, well, maybe that's a way of loving other people and therefore emulating God. Whereas, and in Catholicism, which had ties to pagan religion in many ways, sex was not ruled out. The gustiness, the enjoyment of sex, it had to be controlled by the church. It had to occur in marriage. It had to occur. It had to be sanctified. But in itself, it was simply a way of propagating the race, and what could be wrong with that, in accordance with God's laws. So you get this interesting reversal that Protestantism was a reaction, a kind of often a puritanical reaction against that, until recently, when many Protestant sects are quite happy with the idea. Many Protestant sects, divisions within Protestantism, are happy with the idea of sex. And in Catholicism, until recently also, often there was a kind of Puritanism of a Catholic sort. In Ireland, for instance. I don't know if any of you know the work of the great novelist James Joyce. He grew up in Catholic society in which sex was thought of the way the Puritans would have. And he reacted, and for that he was condemned, and in fact his books were occasionally banned. Maybe I don't know if they still are in Ireland, but for a long time you couldn't read Ulysses, which has a lot of sex in it, in Ireland, and even couldn't be sold in the United States until about 12 years or so after it was written. It was banned. It was seized by the immigration people and destroyed. Go ahead. Maybe did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot in terms of Plato, and there's kind of two key dialogues, if you want to. It's the Symposium and the Phaedrus, and the Phaedrus is very strange because in describing love, he makes this metaphor, of the soul, that the soul is like a charioteer with two horses, and that. You mind if I get into this?
No, if Adriana doesn't.
So one of the horses is noble and well-bred and well-mannered, and follows the lead of the charioteer, and the other one is unruly and wild and has its own kind of very chaotic nature. And the charioteer is supposed to be reason, and I think that noble steed is supposed to be something like the spirited element of the soul, and the wild steed is supposed to be, I don't know what it's called.
Spiritual.
It's kind of base desire.
The white was spiritual and the black horse was base.
Yeah, some kind of.
And the charioteer would be reason trying to keep them in control.
Yeah, and so in this metaphor, when you come upon somebody that, so first of all, the idea of this soul is that this chariot was wandering around in heaven, around true beauty and truth and God, and then it fell down into a body, and so now when you see somebody who has some of a reflection of that truth that you saw there, you're in awe, and you try to spend time with them and to remember this beautiful world that you fell from. But the point about sex is that this wild steed, when you come to a person, Plato thinks this wild steed says, forget about what's beautiful and true about them, grab them, jump onto them. And this, he thinks, is the very base and vulgar part of man. And so you should try to control this steed and beat him and keep him in check. Something like this.
Okay, anyone want to say anything about this? Why to continue on that?
You define sexual love in terms of three concepts: the libidinal, the erotic, and the romantic. The libidinal is the animal part. The erotic is more of the imagination part. And here I want to stop because at some point you say that with the erotic we can enjoy the presence of someone for whom we don't have libidinal desire. So I wanted to ask you if this means that erotism has two aspects. The aspect of when the beloved is not involved, and you can see someone for whom you have no libidinal desire, and then the other aspect is when the erotic comes together with the libidinal and the romantic to give rise to the meaning of life, as you say, and this only happens in the beloved. So
right. The analysis you're referring to is between the libidinal, the erotic, and the romantic. You can say get to the romantic yet. Like all of my analyses, these are conceptual tools. And in terms of me as a thinker, I think of myself as a craftsman or carpenter in a shop, and suddenly he needs something done, and he grabs for a tool that'll do it. I don't lay any importance on the concepts themselves. They're just tools to help clarify some job that I want. And that, I think, is relevant to what you were saying about there being two kinds, one in which eros is combined with the libidinal, and the other in which it's purified and separated from the libidinal. In a sense, one might say that all three of them happen or can happen simultaneously. You could have a relationship which is libidinal, erotic, and romantic, and also spiritual. So that one, having made the artificial distinction, I don't want to be a slave to it. It's just that will give me a certain insight, which I can then walk around in order to show the complexity of human nature. Also, I'm not sure that they ever occur in any kind of purity. Is there such a thing as a libidinal interest devoid of other things like the erotic, for instance? See, the point about Freud is that Freud came from a scientific tradition, which you will all recognize, that's called reductivism. That is, if you can... Well, Arthur, you're nodding. Maybe you should explain it.
Well, it's something we were just talking about in physics today.
No, talk so everyone can.
Is you take just an idea and break it down to a single set of
Unanalyzable rock bottom bases.
Exactly.
Then you can find out all there is to know about it.
Or at least everything about it can be derived from those from that set of principles.
Right. Now that's an attitude that has intrigued me all my life, and I finally came to grips with it in a book of mine called Feeling and Imagination, where I tried to express my doubts about there being, if it making any sense. What would it be like to get to the rock bottom about anything? Maybe there is no rock bottom. You know, who said that the world can be understood, can be reduced to any principle that will enable us to know everything or know anything? In fact, the search for the meaning of everything, right, and string theory comes into this, because maybe just as a matter of advertising, but maybe it's fundamental in their concept. They describe themselves as the theory of everything, that they want to find a rock bottom solution to the nature of the physical universe. But maybe there isn't any rock bottom. Maybe we don't even know what we're looking for. Maybe we'll never be able to find it. It doesn't mean that we couldn't pick up some interesting facts and theories on the way, and that's for scientists to determine. But often scientists are fooled by their own propaganda, that is fundraising, which is to say we've reached a very interesting conclusion here, and if we only are given enough funds and allowed to continue, maybe 10,000, 50,000 years, we'll get to the bottom of everything. We'll find out what everything is like. You know, it's exhilarating, and some people will pay for that exhilaration. But otherwise, maybe it's simply a big mistake in scientific theory to assume that there is a rock bottom. Freud did that. In the 19th century, people were very optimistic about the hard sciences, physics and chemistry in particular, and his idea was to create a psychology on the model of that, to make psychology into a hard science, and to reduce all of the psychological appearances to some rock bottom ideas. And one idea, I don't want to go through the whole Freudian structure. If you're interested, I apologize, but it's all I know. I'm so limited. Look at the third volume of the trilogy, where I have a 70-page chapter on Freud as a philosopher and a philosopher of love. One of the elements, one of quite a number of these elements, is the idea of libido, and that's why I use the word the libidinal, to separate myself from Freud while also talking about things similar to what he does when he talks about the libido. His idea is that the libido is a field of force, which he gets from Schopenhauer, and, as he admits, and it is just sheer energy. It explains the nature of passion. Why? Because people are libidinally attracted to each other. It's mindless. It's not civilized. On the contrary, it can be very dangerous to civilization when, for reasons of libidinal love, people do foolish things and endanger the species. Who knows? You know, all sorts of examples. But without it, one wouldn't be able to explain human feelings, affect, or the way in which human beings are capable of loving. Now, the reason I mention this is because I wanted to make sure that Adriana was right in her presentation of my analysis. It isn't as if there is a separate thing which is the libidinal. It would be like saying that there is a rock bottom energy which is libido, as Freud reduces love to, right? It's a useful concept. It's a tool. It enables me to set up the contrast. It enables me to make the analysis, because in the process, I think I can illuminate different aspects of human nature. The libidinal, the erotic, and then later we'll get to the romantic. But if somebody said, well, why can't they all interact? I would say, that's fine, let's try that out. And I have a couple of paragraphs on that. I don't know how far I can go. Well, maybe in a sense I've been skirting around that in many places. Or if someone says, well, you know, these are so antagonistic, they're going to interfere with each other. And certainly can find extreme examples. A man who, for reasons of his own libidinal impulse, rapes a woman can't just say, well, you know, it's part of love. We all believe in love, and this is my contribution to the cause. In Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, you know about that at least, right? The greatest opera many people say that was ever written. His servant Leporello takes Don Giovanni aside at one point at the beginning of the second act and says to him, look, what are you doing? Don't you realize you seduce all of these women and then you abandon them, and some of them are in misery. You know, they're not all flirts. They really treat love seriously, and they fall in love with you, and you just ditch them. You do a great deal of harm. Right? To which Don Giovanni replies in Italian. I'll translate it, but you can figure it out. He says, "Ma è tutto amore." You get the idea. But it's all love. Right. Well, the point is that love can do a great deal of harm. And if you refuse to say it's just love, you then are in a position to say that the libidinal at its worst can do a great deal of harm and can be evil. And just because you have libidinal interests, which in men in particular involves physical aggressiveness because both are based on testosterone, and then you feel, well, you know, I'm just doing what I was made to do. That's no justification. That's wrong. That's evil. The greatest evil in rape is not in entering the body of an unwilling woman. It's violating her will. It's violating her being by not doing what she wants you to do. Even if you convince yourself that's what she really wants, that always comes up in rape cases where the defense of the raper tries to convince the court that the woman really wanted it. That's a male myth. Most women, probably a great majority who are raped, don't want it. And the crime, which doesn't enter into the law courts because it's such an abstract philosophical crime, is violating her will, violating her personhood, violating her autonomy. But of course, that's too much for the law courts, so they talk about her body being invaded against her choice, without her compliance, non-consensual sex.
So physical violence.
But it's the idea of the consensuality and its destruction that seems to me to be the basic thing about the evil of rape.
So physical violence is exactly the same thing, then?
Violence is
exactly the same kind of thing? Or robbery or anything where...
well, if by violence you mean non-consensual harm done to another person.
Yeah, I don't mean like
yes.
sport.
No, I mean there's a lot of violence in football, and people are not sent to prison for that. I mean that's part of the game. You run that risk. So you see, it's a non-consensual violence.
Can the other types of love have this kind of negative side to them, as the
I think so.
does?
I think that the analysis is made in such a broad way because I wanted to see what it's like somebody with a net. Let's see what we'll pick up with it. And so I wanted it to be a big net. But I don't think the mind works, at least not my mind, works in such a way that it can have necessary and sufficient conditions so that there will be no overlap. Mathematics can do that. Logic is based on that, and a lot of modern philosophy, which I don't subscribe to, is based on logic. But the world, as I see it, is a fluid mess. It's well, the subtitle is of the book, Feeling and Imagination, is the vibrant flux of our existence. Human life and reality is a flux, but it can be vibrant because there are values, and that's what the book is about. So that you're right. There would be more than just what is at the core of these concepts, and they can overlap in all sorts of various ways. Adriana?
I had another question about the erotic before I move on.
No, but you haven't said anything about the erotic. We hardly got started on libidinal. What do you mean by erotic? How do you interpret my use of it, since we're working out of my book?
I interpret it as the use of imagination to exalt the beloved or to appreciate the beautiful of things. That is the interpretation.
Imagination comes into it, but I give the analogy, which is opening an enormous can of worms, with gravity. Gravity is a concept that Newton used that is still thought of as being one of the laws of nature, but the whole trend of 20th and 21st century is to get far beyond the reliance upon that concept of gravity. What Newton observed was the apple falling on his head. The bodies seem to get attracted, the apple not aiming for him, but aiming for the earth, that objects at a height are pulled to the earth, but it's a mystical sort of thing. You don't see it. Have you ever seen gravity? No. It's a force, and yet without it, Newton says we can't explain how the planets go around the sun, how the sun stays where it is, or all the movement in the heavens. Gravity, therefore, is a very important law of nature for him. Now, what intrigues me is that it's a mysterious thing. No matter how much scientists may dress it up, it's a great mystery about why should things pull at each other? Why should these fields of forces somehow be interrelated in a dynamic way of a gravitational sort of way? And then I think about people. I mean, a man and a woman, they gravitate to each other. And sometimes dramatically. Well, this is so far before your time. There was a cartoon in my childhood called Gerald McBoing Boing, and that sound, it is boing, suddenly something will strike his mind or something like that, and go boing, get the idea of vibrations like that. Well, but that's the way people often do relate to each other. Not always, but sometimes. Man is walking down the street, and then, at least metaphorically and also mythologically, it strikes him, and and he's in love. This is a constant theme in the movies, No explanation, no accounting for such things, but it's such a force that he has to live in it. And it's more than just sexual libido, which is a biological thing related to reproduction of the species and involves certain changes in the body. This is suddenly a feeling that this is my girl, this is the one for me. And it's very hard to know how it happens or why it happens. Could be because she looks like his mother. Freud tended that way. Or it could be she doesn't look like his mother and he's reacting against his mother, so it's always subject to some kind of interpretation. But people do get attracted to one another. It usually doesn't end up being falling in love or being that dramatic, but rather it could be friendship, or somehow I can communicate with that person, or we have something in common, or I feel for him. And it varies. It varies. The feeling can be strong sometimes, weak at other times. Can be disappointed. This lead to disappointments. It can lead to ecstasies. So for me, the erotic is this sort of gravitational phenomenon in relation to somebody else. But having said that, I can see how this would also apply not just to other persons, but to other things. A work of art, a work of carpentry, just the shape of that, or the smoothness of the surface of a table. You sort of gravitate towards that. It's what you like. It somehow comes down to the whole system of likings, which seem to be very different from love. But this eros is only, the erotic, is only one of the elements in love. But it's the part of love that explains our attachment to various things. It can be the result of the passage of time. The old people, having lived together a long time, become very attached. They get used to each other. They get habituated. They become a habit for each other. The line in My Fair Lady, I've become accustomed to her face, her ups, her downs, her smiles, her frowns. That seems to have nothing to do with libido, but it looks as if one could say, well, but break the habit. Why do you call this love? But there's something in an attachment to another person which is part of love, and the attachment can come in this bizarre way that is comparable to gravity, that I call the erotic. Veronica?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I really understand what you're saying by the
I don't know whether I do either.
Or that habituation really is a form of love, because I guess even nowadays people seem to think more, rather than in the past, that there was one person meant for me, but now there's a lot of people that divorce and do those types of things, and it seems that just because you are getting used to someone, that doesn't mean that love really is there.
Well, but why couldn't you say, instead of gravitating toward your one and only, you gravitate toward many people?
Well, I guess so.
The universe is infinite. It goes off in all directions. Why does it have to be limited to a linear
I was just
progression?
trying to relate that to what you were saying about the getting accustomed to someone, that being a part of the erotic. That's how we were, I just don't see how that's a part of that love.
Well, it works the way people have thought about love. The line comes, particularly the way I was badly mauling it, comes from the musical My Fair Lady. It doesn't exist in the same way in George Bernard Shaw's play, which you're going to be reading. It occurred to me, Pygmalion, that's right. And in the case, the difference between the play and the musical is that at the end of the musical, there is a kind of romance, a love that's developed between them, and maybe, who knows, they might even get married afterwards. Nothing like that happens in any of the versions, but it's much more romantic than the play was. So that just for there to be the erotic attachment doesn't mean it's going to be love of a romantic sort or of a marital sort, but it's a kind of love. If you're gravitating towards somebody, that's not hostility. Hostility goes in the opposite direction, and it's not indifference, which means you don't even feel anything for the other person, don't even notice the other person. But I don't want to, create these artificial principalities. I just want to make a concept which itself is analyzable into more refined concepts, that to the extent that they help us to think better. I think in various places, in that book in particular, I say that, of course, there will be subdivisions, and that it isn't as if everything will be alike. But that gives you an idea of a fact, a phenomenon related to love, that people might not have been able to think about as clearly without this kind of analysis. And my hope is to help them to make these difficult ideas a little more clear.
I think your question was more like, does you think gravitation is part of like, kind of like love at first sight?
No, not really, but
So that's kind of what I was thinking of when you said that. With the erotic, well, like the gravitational pull towards someone is kind of like instantaneous almost, as opposed to as if you're with someone for a long time, it's not, instantaneous. It's just
Yeah, well,
kind of,
let's get on to the romantic, because there it's more relevant what you're saying, I think. About the imagination, I think of that as belonging to Eros, but it isn't as if that is enough or that defines Eros, the erotic. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Eros, I mean the erotic. I was very careful to call these, with these adjectival forms, not to get it confused with what Plato had said or what Freud had said. When the book came out, it got a very favorable review by someone who is a philosopher, but a literary philosopher, and in a literary journal. And she sent me her review before it came out, and I was horrified. She said, Singer distinguishes between libido, eros, and romance. And so I quickly wrote her saying, no, libido is Freud, eros is Plato. I'm talking about, I call it the libidinal, the erotic, the romantic, in order to indicate I'm saying something different. And when the review was published, she had it right. So again, here I keep saying eros, but I mean the erotic. And imagination, I think, is important in that. Does anybody want to say anything about that? There's a chapter on imagination in Feeling and Imagination, but I'd better not get into that. How about romance, the third?
Okay. Before we move on to romance, I just want to ask you a question about the erotic. You say that without the erotic, there would be no civilization and no desecration of it, and it wasn't clear to me why or what you meant.
Well, I often see, nowadays not as much, but, well, you all know, all of the graffiti that appears in public places. I live in the Back Bay, and in a part of Mass Avenue, part south of Boylston Street, I think it was, they did a lot of resurfacing of the concrete sidewalks. And I was horrified that everybody felt the need to put in his or her initials, and sometimes with hearts and dates. And it got me thinking, what's happening there? They're using their imagination to sort of think of a time, who knows, 20 years, I don't know how big an imagination they have, 50 years, when people are going to see that, and it'll mean something to them. Of course, people won't know what in the world was going on in those days, or who JT and LW are. Nobody will know. They themselves probably will fall out of love in 2 months, and will regret it, and it won't mean anything to them later on. Or it might. Maybe they'll come back with their children and say, "This was when we were," in Plato, in Shakespeare, for instance, in As You Like It, that play, there is the young man who's fallen in love with the heroine Rosalind, and he feels worthless and carried away by his love, and he takes it out on the trees. When I talked about the innocent trees, well, he carves their initials in the trees, and hearts probably, and sort of desecrates the beauty of these natural entities whom I love very much. But it's as if somebody captured you and engraved on your forehead, LW loves CCM or something. Something has nothing to do with you. So you could go through the world advertising this love that he has. And why should the trees be forced into that condition? Well, because they can't help it. They're not mobile. They're stable. People can just go up and do to them whatever they can get away with. It's an act of imagination in thinking that this is going to mean anything. It's like an artist who expresses himself in his painting. It's an expression of him, but also takes imagination to make it a good painting. So this expresses what the young lovers feel, and they have enough imagination to think it might matter to somebody else, but they don't have enough imagination to realize how ridiculous it makes them, and how unfair it is to everybody else to have to be confronted with this. It's a kind of exhibitionism, which, if it were with parts of the body, would be criminal. And I suppose it probably is criminal to do it to the poor innocent cement in the sidewalk. But it takes imagination, that's all I meant.
I guess I just feel like that's still a very strong statement to say that without the erotic there would be no civilization.
Yeah, I think so, because the erotic is a way of, civilization is a way of creating objects that express the interests of the creators for the enjoyment and glorification of what other people also care about, so that the prince who built the Taj Mahal, you know the story of that. Well, why don't you tell it then?
He built it for his wife, or...
His wife,
and
whom he had loved.
I don't really know much about the story, actually, but...
Who died, and he was so grief-stricken, he wanted to make some kind of tomb or temple, but he also wanted it to be an expression of her goodness and beauty and the great love that they had for each other. And that's part of the account. It may be mythological, but at least that's the account. And so he made this magnificent Muslim style, or what is it? It must be Muslim, because it's curved like Muslim. In any event, Indian style palace. It's not a tomb. It's not a mausoleum, but it's a beautiful building that expresses what he felt for that woman, and that adds to civilization. I mean, we stand there, if we go there, and watch it, look at it with awe, becomes a tourist attraction. It makes life more interesting. Think of all the millions of people who've spent money and time just to go see the Taj Mahal. Well, that's what civilization is like. It's without imagination and without the erotic, it wouldn't occur.
Sorry, I feel like there's so much more to civilization though than just those things. So I just don't think that statement can really be made.
The graffiti are a kind of vulgarization of civilization. I mean, they do it out in public. They do it so everybody will see. Or the subway cars, which used to in New York in particular, and you don't see it so often nowadays, but you've probably seen it in the movies or heard of it, the cars covered with graffiti. Well, those graffiti are a kind of calligraphy, very curved, elaborate designs, possibly with the initials of people that they know, but nobody else could know. And they do it as a kind of expression of their feelings, or their love, or even maybe the love of their life in New York for all to see. Well, it may be a vulgarization, but it's still a vulgarization of civilization. Civilization progresses that way, and the parts that we cherish as great works of art usually come out of that.
The way I interpret it is, I mean, not so much civilization like, organized government, but it gives to culture and aesthetic beauty, which is essentially civilization in quotes. Like, if there wasn't the era, the erotic, everything would just be very cold, and there would be no aesthetic beauty. Everybody would just be, the way I picture it at least, would just be a robot, just, doing stuff, and there would be no pleasure or art or any sorts of expression of human feeling. That's how I see
So,
what it means.
You're going to be reading about a certain aspect of Freud's philosophy for next time, and my criticism of it. I don't think I go into this, but it suddenly occurs to me from what Sturas was saying that this, it's worth telling you about it. Freud wrote a couple of articles on aesthetics, except the psychology of art. And he apologizes, says, I'm not a philosopher, I'm just a psychologist, but I have ideas about the psychological development that goes into the being of art. So he starts out with the fact that the artist is a biological entity, like everyone else, and that he wants, and it's always from the man's point of view, that's what Freud is like, he wants what everybody wants. What is it that everybody wants? They're all men. What is it all men want? They want money, they want power, they want the love of women. Money, power, and the love of women, right? The artist, Freud says, is usually somebody who has a defect. Most people, if you want money, you want power, you go to school, you become an accountant, you work your way up the hierarchy of the business, and then you end up being the CEO, and you get more money than you know what to do with, lots of power, and the love of women. The women flock around those who have money and power. That's the normal, healthy, ordinary way of going about things, according to Freud. But if you're a little different for whatever reason, you just can't compete on that level. But if you are not, and if you can't compete and that's the end of it, then you're a misfit, or you become sick, or a loser in life. If, however, you're not only different in that respect, but also you can do something that no one else can do. You have a knack, for instance, for drawing, for instance, or you have perfect pitch, or you have a certain kind of acuity in your body. I suppose this could apply to the athlete as well, but he's talking about artists. And if you then are recognized for that, and it's developed in you, then you start making things that nobody else can make, right? And if you do it well enough, people will pay attention to what you've done, and they'll give you money. And if you're a good enough artist, like a Picasso, you get so much money, you'll have power with it. And with the money and the power, there'll be the women who'll throw themselves at your feet, the way they did with great artists, for instance, in the 19th century, Liszt and Chopin and other heroes, because they were such great musicians. And even nowadays, there are the rock singers that women swoon over. There are the musical stars. They're not similar to the ones in the 20th century, but they can have all the groupies and all the appurtenances of great wealth and power. Freud's solution is that what the artist can't get directly, he gets indirectly. That is, he can't go up the ladder of business, but he gets it indirectly, because by pursuing his knack, he creates things for which people will reward him. Now, the reason this is related to what Sturas was saying, I think, is because there's always this lust or love that Freud is talking about the love of money, the love of power, the love of women. And if you can't get it directly, you might get it indirectly, but those are the people who create civilization. Civilization itself, on Freud's view, is an indirect accumulation of the love that everybody wants. There's a book of his called, one of his, I think, great books that everybody should be forced to read before graduating from college, like the Republic, everyone should be reading, and that is Civilization and Its Discontents. I strongly recommend it to you. It's only about 100 pages long. And in it he says that civilization arises out of the love of beauty, but then it separates one from the satisfaction in love and sex that one really wants. So there's a conflict between civilization and sexuality. That's the issue that Freud talks about. I don't agree with the basic argument, but that doesn't matter. My point is that whatever the outcome of civilization is, it originates in a kind of love. And that's what I try to explain through the erotic and through the idea of the imagination. So that's where that comes in. Okay, it must be getting on. Yeah, it is. Should we take a break now? Or should we talk about the romantic?
We can talk about the
What tell me, what does class want? Do you want to take a break or you want to talk about the romantic? All right, let's go on to the romantic. There is the libidinal, the erotic, and the romantic.
The romantic, the way I perceive the romantic is it is what unifies the libidinal with the erotic, but it also needs a sense of perpetual, of continuous love. And here I give the example of the moon cycle, and how the lovers identify that the moon cycle and the appearance of the moon with something that is constant and that they want to associate with their love.
Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything about the romantic? I think Veronica was talking about the romantic last time when you were talking about falling in love. There are two principles that seem to me to be definitive for the romantic. One is this, well, before I get to that, the one and only. That it isn't something you can have with everybody, at least not at the same time. It's having an attachment to at least, or let's say to one other person. And the second principle is to having that intimate relationship forever. So the idea of forever, or as the religions say, or the poets say, eternity, whatever that means, right, is built into the idea of the romantic, and also that there's something unique in the attachment to one and only person. Now, this is also a very enormous net, because why one? I've thought an awful lot about that, and it occurs to me that if you can find just one who really would be totally satisfying, whom you can love as much as you're capable, and who can love you as much as you're capable, I think you wouldn't feel the need for anything more. This was tested in the 1960s by the communes, in which there would be sharing of bedfellows, of wife swapping, but also with people who weren't married, the idea that why be exclusive? Well, I think most human beings at least seem to feel that one is enough, because if it's an adequate one, it'll satisfy all your needs. And with democracy, as I think I mentioned that, there's a kind of democratization of love, where one other person is expected to do everything. It's what do you call an all-purpose solution to life's problems. Now, as a matter of fact, it may be hard to hope ever to find any one person who can do all of that, and in a way that is not inconsistent with that, most, I think probably statistically, most people have sought for love with more than one other person, one other partner. Whole cultures are built up out of the idea of polygamy for the men, or polygyny, even, not too many, but some for women. That is, polygamy is men having many wives, women having many husbands. Or in monogamous societies, that a man will have two establishments, one for his wife and another for his mistress. In France, in the 19th, and probably still in many ways, it was commonplace that you would marry the right woman, but then you would also satisfy your sexual needs with some other woman, even having a second family, and even sometimes with the wife knowing about it. In other words, adultery was built into the matrimonial system. But whether or not it's that rigorously organized, adultery is not uncommon, and even if men don't indulge and are faithful to their wives, there is the tradition embodied in the saying, "I love my wife, but oh, you kid." You know that? That comes from the 1920s. "I love my wife, but oh, you kid," meaning there's a part of me that would like to indulge itself with you sexually, prostitute or girlfriend or mistress or some beautiful woman. I'm talking again, it's always from the man's point of view. Or the woman too. You know, I love my husband, but there are all these beautiful boys lying around. There is that sentiment, which is very common. So why does it have to be one and only? Well, if you can find just one and it's perfect, just right, you know, for most people that might be enough. Also, it gets to be a question of economics. How many households can you support? And how do you keep the wives from getting jealous? Jealousy is a very important phenomenon. Some people even try to define love in terms of jealousy about competitors. But if they're going to be jealous, then this multiple kind of arrangement isn't going to be a very happy one. But that, I think, was part of what was going on in the 19th and 20th century concepts of romantic love with a capital R, right? The romantic. The other principle of perpetuity is explained by the fact that you don't want to put in all the energy with somebody who's going to ditch you the next day, or whom you know you're going to be tired of. Men in particular, but also women, are notoriously faithless. This idea of being permanent, you know, that's right. I'm the Cole Porter song, but I'm always true to you, darling. Right? That's the dream. But because it's Cole Porter, who was very humorously cynical, the next part of it is, do you know it? I will always be true to you, darling, in my fashion. Right? So that is an escape clause, enabling the person to the woman in particular to find what she wants in love with other people. But that's very common. At the same time, there is something beautiful about the romantic. In The Purple Rose of Cairo, do you know that movie of Woody Allen? I'll be showing it tomorrow from 2 to 5 in my film course, which is about philosophy of film. And what I just thought of, there's a scene in which the perfect man, the actor who comes off out of the screen, descends into the movie audience. It's a fantasy, and falls in love with Cecilia, who's just a plain, ordinary married woman, and declares his complete romantic love for her. And he's pure. He's absolutely innocent. He really believes it. He feels it. At one point, he's separated in this strange new world off the screen, and ends up being accosted by a very pleasant woman who is a prostitute, and says, "Would you like to see where I work?" And he says, "Oh yes, that's interesting. I really like to see where you work. You look like such a fine person." And so they go to a brothel, and there he meets other girls, and they all try to entice him, and he doesn't respond. It's not in his character. It's not the way it was made in the movie. And they try to explain to him, and he finally sort of gets a rough idea and says, "Oh, well, no, I have to tell you, fine ladies, I love Celia, and I couldn't do what you're saying." And they say, "Oh, well, we're not talking about love. You can love Celia. We're talking about making love." And then he does really seem to understand where he is and what's at stake. And he says, "Oh, you don't understand. Celia is for me everything. She is all that I've ever wanted. She is for me perfection. I wouldn't want to do any of those things with anybody else." And the scene ends when the first very likable young woman who's taken him there looks in amazement and says, "Are there any other men out there like that?" It's a very funny Woody Allen movie, and I think it's one of his very best. Well, I think that's the point. To get somebody who will be perfect and with whom you will be perfectly allied may really be unrealizable, but that's part of the romantic. That's why I tell that story. Do I need to repeat it? Oh, wait a minute. This is a good point for me to close my eyes. Adriana, could you take a head count of how many have done today's reading?
Yes, sure.
But I'm not interested in names. I just want to know how many.
Okay. 7.
Can I open?
Yes.
How many?
7.
That's pretty good. Then possibly remember the George S. Kaufman remark to Irving Berlin. Kaufman was a very famous playwright who wrote the screenplays for Groucho Marx, for the Marx Brothers movies, and various successes on Broadway. And Irving Berlin wrote the song "Always." And I mentioned that. But do you know what the song sounds like? "I'll be loving you always." Very sentimental, romantic song. "With a love that's true, always." Right? All right. The wit and cynic Kaufman says, "Irving, I think you should change that title or change that song. You ought to make it, 'I'll be loving you Thursday.'" Well, it's funny because it wouldn't be romantic. Right. Okay. Anything else about the romantic?
Well, I wanted to mention how this relates to the myth you mentioned. The speech by Socrates and Aristotle's. I forgot the name of it. Well, in any case, where Socrates is asked to define what love is, and he says that it means the perpetual possession of the good.
Right.
And it also emphasizes that it has to be perpetual, like
Yeah.
you do here.
And that's what Christianity picks up out of Platonism, because God is perpetually good and has, in a sense, the perpetual possession of the good. Without Platonism and Greek philosophy, there wouldn't be any Christianity. One wouldn't have got any religion of that sort. Judaism comes into it because of the Bible, but those Greek concepts are really very special. Out of them, the Christian religion generates. Now, anyhow, what do we mean by the Christian religion? We mean the religion of the Western world, and Greek philosophy is the beginning of the Western world. All right, we now could take a break, or we can go on for another half hour. We don't have to stay for the full 3 hours, because in principle, the course lasts for 50 minutes times 3. So you tell me what you would like. I'm having a good time. I may faint at any moment. You want a drink, or do you want to go out anywhere? Well, then, should we continue? All right. Anybody wants to say about that chapter on sexual love? And should we go on to the one on stages of love, the loving society?
Yes. In this chapter of Love and Society, you define different kinds of relationships and how love is different in these relationships. And first of all, I would like to say that you talk a lot about friendship, and you mention that you disagree with Aristotle's notion of friendship occurring only between two virtuous human beings.
True friendship.
True friendship.
Because he talks about other kinds.
Yes.
I don't go into them.
No, but you just mentioned that you don't agree with this notion because then we would be disregarding the capacity of love to treat someone better than he is. And I wanted to mention that I don't agree with this. You give the example of being friends with a criminal, for example, and sort of disregarding the faults of that person and still being able to achieve.
Yeah. Do you think you can't be friends with a criminal?
I think that having more or less the same morals and the same values as someone else is very important for a friendship to...
If you can quantify values, I mean, is there anybody that you have the same values with? We usually share values in some respects, but not with others. And if you feel friendly, you ignore that. For instance, at a very low level, I find, in my case, I find it very easy to be friendly with people I talk with for a couple of minutes in the bus or in the street. There's a kind of incipient friendliness that usually doesn't amount to anything. And it's because we have different values. There's a very limited number of people I could really spend much time with. I get bored with them. They get bored with me. I don't anymore. I used to when I was young. But nowadays I don't care about football heroes or baseball players. Basketball I never paid much attention to. I don't drink beer. I'm not a regular guy in any of those ways. So how could I expect those who are, which is most people, normal people, to be friends with me. And yet, in a casual, incipient way, I find I can be friends with a great many. It's by disregarding all of the other values. That's one thing I wanted to say. Second thing, if you think about Hollywood movies, the people in them are often either criminals or else they're robbers and violent, they're troubled. They fall in with somebody who might get them out of their troubles, or they're thrown together in a romantic pattern that I discuss, I think, toward the end of this book, which they're both caught in, so that they have no interest in each other, and sometimes a lot of hostility, but because they're in it together, they have to escape by means of each other, and so they become friends. I mean, you all can think of dozens of examples of this very common movie theme. Now, if in that event, their values are not alike, at the end, they might, if they're different sexes, they might get married, or they might become lovers, or, well, we'll be talking about this in case of Pygmalion, where they don't do either of those things, but they become sort of comrades together. And that seems to me to be built into the structure of friendship, that you come to accept the other person for what that other person is. In other words, there's the idea of bestowal, even if that person is different from yourself. You share some values, but maybe not too many, not as many as is needed to fall in love and to get married and to live in a happy married relationship, a loving relationship ever after. Is that what you don't agree with?
Not exactly. I'm not saying that they need to be exactly the same, but I think that there needs to be at least some sort of similarity between the concepts of good and bad, because these are important for trust to exist. And I think that if trust doesn't exist between two peoples, then no true friendship can arise between them.
No, I see the truth in what you're saying. I could never be friends with anybody who does that, who goes out with a BB gun and shoots cats, or something. How can you be friends with a monster of that sort? That, you see, in some respects, it surely is true that one can't imagine being friends. On the other hand, the political monsters of modern history, people like Stalin and Hitler, Mussolini, Saddam Hussein, they were very friendly. People had friends who recognized what they were, so that some people are able to overcome their horror at what they also do.
But do you think those were true friends? Because when someone has power, many people can pretend to be friends.
But then that's true in any event. That's true of any kind of friendship or any kind of relationship. It doesn't necessarily follow from a sharing of the morals, as you said. But I see your point. In Aristotle's idea of true friendship, people are alike in virtue, so that they can really respect each other. But it also means you're going to limit the number of friends you're going to have. You're not going to have too many.
Well, you're not going to have too many true friends. You can have.
But that's by definition. That's the definition of the word true. Oh no, I'm a true friend of a man I meet casually, and we talk briefly, and I'll never see him again. It's a very limited. It's not that I'm not a true friend, that I'm trying to use him or trying to get him to please me in some way. I'm within those very narrow limits. It's a kind of true friendship. It's not as broad as it is with the kind of people that Aristotle is talking about. One wonders how many people there are like that, and really how much you get out of them.
So when you say true friend, you just mean a friend who has no other shady purpose, or a person. When the true friend, I don't understand. True friendship, you mean somebody who is friendly to someone for no, other reason except for the pleasure of conversing with them or sharing ideas. Not like
But this is very interesting. I was just thinking about true friends I've had while we were talking, because as I keep telling you, I learned from being with you. I may not be able to use it too well, and I don't believe anything I've written is the last word of any sort. I think if anything were the last word, that would be wholly unphilosophical. The world is not the last word. Remember, there's no mathematical, it's not like a mathematical problem, so there's no solution. And what I just thought of was a man who was not much older than me, who was a young faculty member at Harvard when I was an undergraduate and then graduate student, and he became a mentor. He was a mentor of mine, and I knew him for the rest of his life. He died about 3 years ago, and I always thought of him and said about him, he's maybe the only person who has never defeated any expectation of mine. He's never betrayed me or let me down. I always think of him as a true friend. Now, it wasn't because, and we also conversed, and there were limits. There were things I couldn't talk with him about, and things he didn't talk to me about. It wasn't as if it was a loving, a romantic relationship, the way it would be between lovers or husband and wife. There were definite limits, not arbitrarily imposed, just the things I wouldn't ask him that I might ask my wife. But it seems to be, the definition seems to be his never having let me down. Now, was I using him, or is this a testament to the true nature of the relationship from my point of view? He might have said, Irving has let me down, he hasn't done this or that, I don't know what. He never complained to me, and I never complained to him. I never felt there was anything I wanted to change. But the criterion that I seem to have used was that he never let me down.
I mean, but so you're saying that you can't be a true friend with somebody if he let you down. I mean, letting you down, you might have, I don't know, your first concert, and you really wanted your friend to be there, and he didn't come because, I don't know, he was snowed in Chicago or something. I mean, he let you down.
No, not if he was snowed in.
Or
no, if he forgot. If he said, I'll be there tomorrow night, and then, he met a lovely young lady and said, well, Irving won't notice I'm not at this concert. I don't know, he could have let me down, but if he did, what's wrong with that? That he never did let me down.
I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying...
Is that defining what makes it a true friendship?
No, I'm asking you. So if somebody let you down, he can't be a true friend of yours? Is that what you're...
I think that's an element. How big an element, I'm not clear yet. But let's say you do have a relationship with somebody who continually lets you down. So he's not a true friend.
Continually is different. Well, continually is different from once or twice. So, because you were saying that you're.
Well, everybody is fine. I mean, we're only mortal. Occasionally, they might let you down in some unimportant way, but my image is that he didn't let me down, but I haven't probed it enough. Somebody might have said, "Oh, but remember this or that," but it couldn't have been too important, or I would have remembered it.
Okay, so not letting you down in an important way. Okay, I'm just trying to see what you mean by true friend.
But I don't know how far this is going to take us in terms of the concept of true friendship. Adriana, Dimitri, or Arthur, were you going to say something?
Sure, may I say something? You talked about this idea of bestowal, that somebody may be very flawed in various ways, a criminal, any number of things. However, you can just forgive that and love them as they are, something like this. So my question is, I had this sense that the reason that you are friends with somebody or you love them is because of some good in them that you wish to either be near or have some or become like.
Well,
So my question is, can somebody be
that's not my idea.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So can somebody lack all virtue whatsoever, and can you still have this love of bestowal in which you forgive them the fact that they have absolutely no beauty or virtue at all? And still
All these limiting cases are always hard for me to imagine because I never encounter them in the world. Have you ever met anybody who had no redeeming virtues whatsoever?
Okay.
Or somebody who had nothing but redeeming virtues? We're all, a little in between.
Fair enough.
We're a mixture. If the nastiness is too great, we can't stand the person. But a little nastiness we can put up with, and even humor, and even enjoy. So we're all a mixture. Think in terms of the middle. That way you get close to what the world is like.
I guess my real question is that when you have one of these, let's suppose you have a friend who is very brave. On the other hand, he is terrible in every other way. He's a neo-Nazi, any number of things, but very brave. So I could certainly see that you could love that aspect of the brief. You could love his courage in action and fight and things like this.
But think of one of the Hitler Youth, a young fellow who is a fanatic, who's totally dedicated to the cause. He knows that what it asks him to do is horrible to most people, and it will cause pain to a great many, but for reasons of duty, he will be unswerving. And this is not only when he is in control, but when he is asked to risk his life. And he's prepared, really prepared, to die for that cause, right? Can you be a friend with such a person, even though you admire his bravery and fidelity to cause? I would think probably not. So it's a matter of degree. The more you are horrified by what he has turned into, the less likely it'll be for you to be a friend, even though you admire some of his remaining virtues. But if you ask me how many,
No, that's not what I
or where do we draw the line, I would say here I am holding on by my fingertips in the flux of existence, swirling all around me with me part of the stream, and you ask me, you get the idea?
Yeah.
I can't answer that.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. My question is whether you can love anything but a good part of a person. Can you love any part of a person other than their virtue or their excellence?
Oh, well, I think...
Because you seem to say that you kind of forgive and you love them completely, something like that.
I think, yes, you can bestow love upon him despite his lack of perfection. I think not in this book, in the other, in volume 1, I give you the example of the man who loves the blemish on the face of his beloved, a mole or something like that. It's not that it makes her more beautiful. It's not that he goes through life looking for moles because he's a specialist in the beauty of them. Or it's not that it applies to anybody else, but it's her mole. And though it's undesirable in general, and if she wants to remove it, he will encourage her to do it, and say he has lots of money, give her money to get an operation, because that's what she wants. Apart from that, he may love that little mole just because it signifies her. It indicates what she is, but not because it's good in itself.
So could he love her cowardice?
I think he can love anything that sets her apart.
Her cowardice, no. Women are often allowed to be cowardly when men are not. That's not a good example. Would he love her snotty attitude or biting way of talking about people, particularly himself? Can he love her enough to love her for her vicious attacks on him?
Well, vicious attacks might be good, depending on whether they're philosophical.
Well, they may be well done, but you mean good in what sense? Good for him or beneficial to him?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a critique or...
What?
If it's a critique or if it's not just...
It may be, well, what if it's just a fault of hers? And does that make it impossible for him to love her? Probably not.
No,
There'll be other.
I don't mean to love her, I mean to love
Arthur is shaking his head.
I think if you love a person, I mean, it goes back to the reading from last time. If you love a person, there might have been a quote in it this time. It's acceptance of their entire person. So,
what do you mean by acceptance?
The bad along with the good.
right.
Even though you recognize the bad is bad, and if there were some way of helping her to overcome that part of herself, assuming she wants to, you would be eager to cooperate. I think that's right. At least that's part of my idea of love. At times I think I'm crazy, but it seems to be the only view that I can take. That if you love somebody, you love that person, even if that person is not good for you, even if that person does things that you wouldn't approve of, and even if she doesn't love you as much as she loves somebody else, which is, from your point of view, a great fault on her part. But if she's the person you love, then you have to accept it because that's what she wants. That's one reason why love is not always happy, because just loving the other person is no guarantee that both of you are going to be fully satisfied with what happens to each of you.
Can I just ask him one more question?
Sure.
When you say that you accept these faults in a person, what do you mean? Do you mean simply that you don't try to change to help improve this person, or what would it mean not to accept them?
You not try to change them. This was mentioned in the reading from this time. You not try to change them unless they themselves wanted to change. If that person thinks it's a flaw of theirs, then they're trying to change it, then you would support that.
Well, let's say you had a friend who was very deluded in his way of thinking, and you saw that he was going about something the wrong way. Would you attempt to improve him in this, or would you wait for him to choose?
No, Arthur, the real problem comes up if the person, the object, is this young fanatic who kills people, innocent people, who makes himself into a machine, a thing to carry out the orders of those who have power in the cause that he believes in. Can you really love that person?
I think if the person is such a polar opposite from the ideals that you hold.
No, I didn't understand.
Even
an admirable quality such as the fanatic's bravery, the person is such a bad person from your point of view that you would almost contrive the bravery to be foolishness. That
But can't you imagine that at a certain point you're saying, I just can't tolerate being near this kind of person anymore. Why think I'm capable of loving that kind of monster?
But sometimes you might try to see why he became like that, and in the case of the Hitler.
Why you might, but then why should you?
Because you see that, I mean, he's been, in the case that we're talking about, he's been brainwashed, obviously, because that's what they did. From 7 years old, they took them in and, told them various things. And you might see, some traits that, and if you may make the connection that you see some traits in the person, and you see that he kills a bunch of people and burns and I don't know, does whatever. But you see some traits in him that, and then you might think, well, what would have happened if he didn't undergo this brainwashing? And I mean, you may start to really, love him for those traits, and maybe love another image of him, really, and in your love try to maybe change him.
That's one scenario, but there's also another scenario, which is you see that eliminating him from reality would be a benefit to the universe. And so
but that would mean
you take a revolver and shoot him.
No,
and having done that, if somebody said, why did you do that? Could you, in good faith, say, it was because I loved him?
But the point is, if you did that, if you believe that eliminating him is good for the universe, that's your opinion. He believes that eliminating other races is good for the universe. Therefore, if you were inclined to do that, that means that really your moral beliefs wouldn't differ so much.
My moral belief would what?
We're talking about the Hitler Youth, and if you said, well, if you killed him to make the world a better place, according to your views, your moral beliefs would be exactly the same as his would, because
that's true. I agree with that.
So therefore, you couldn't be a friend with him because you had.
But that doesn't make you a friend, because you're going to kill the guy. You murder him. You execute him. Put it that way. I mean, as Hamlet says in that play, love does not that way tend, or affections do not. Ophelia, it's not. Polonius says that to the king after having overheard the conversation between Hamlet and Ophelia, in which Hamlet berates her and tells her to go into a monastery and says she's worthless. And Polonius says, his affections do not that way tend. I think if you're going to murder somebody, one could say, well, that's not the way to show your love. Affections do not that way tend. Even though it's true that it's because you have different moral systems, it may be that the difference in the moral systems causes the death of love. Love is a fragile thing and can be destroyed because of that kind of difference. It can be destroyed for all sorts of reasons, but that would be one. But the difficulty would be to say that you could remain a friend or have love for somebody who is so horrible that you really feel it's your obligation to kill him.
I mean, you may. I mean, you wouldn't really feel the obligation to kill him if you loved him. I mean, I agree. I mean, I wouldn't feel the obligation to kill anyone.
It's the other way
No
around.
matter.
You wouldn't have killed him if you were. If you killed him, it means you didn't have love. Yes, right.
In that case. But what if he was a terminally ill patient and you pulled the plug? You could kill him.
Now
and still
that's
love him.
different. Now you're getting into the plot of John Steinbeck's novel of Mice and Men, and the wonderful movie that was made out of that. Did you see the original? Oh, there's been a recent remake where the little guy who is the close friend of this tall, somewhat retarded fellow who kills a woman without knowing what he was doing. He was sort of stroking her and ended up wringing her neck, and sort of didn't know what he was doing. He was criminally, I don't know if you could call it criminally insane, because he was hardly aware of what he was doing. But you get his problem, and the local men are out ready to lynch the guy and maltreat him if they ever caught him, and they're about to catch him. And so his friend, the little one, shoots him. And one feels that that was an act of love, that it was because he loved him that he could kill him rather than let him be caught by the people who would not understand and would do him harm. It was a way not of allowing no harm to be done, merely killing him so that others cannot kill him. Now that's an act of love. But that's not what we were talking about before.
I think we're getting pretty far off the topic of friendship.
I didn't get it.
So I think we're getting pretty far off the topic of
Well, maybe we aren't. Adriana, you want to bring us back? Let's go into the next chapter, which is more than you have, which is a stage theory. Did you notice that? Do I call it that in the chapter? It's a theory of different kinds of love developing out of each other, and some of the higher levels in the stage being impossible unless you've gone through an earlier stage. I get the idea for that in the primatological research that I mentioned by Harry Harlow. Harry Harlow was a biologist at the University of Wisconsin about 50 years ago, who did research on the feelings of primates in a way that nobody else had attempted anything like that, particularly chimpanzees and macaques. And he put it into a book of his called Learning to Love, which is mainly about these primates, and to some extent with the relevance to the primates that we are. And in it, he reached some conclusions, one of which is that if a juvenile hasn't gone through peer love, he or she will find it very hard or impossible to have mature sexual love for a mate or any other person that he might want to spend the rest of his life with. And some of them would be clearly schizophrenic. So that there is a stage theory built into his analysis, or comes out of his analysis, which seemed to me very suggestive, and I play with the idea of there being stages like that among human beings. So that if you want to have a happy marriage, I'm being facetious because it's not something you can just, arrange. See to it that you have lots of friends when you're young, and that peer friends, and that you develop out of that. Now, this reminds me of another thing that's related. In Israel in the early days, I don't know if there are many of the kibbutzes that existed then, boys and girls were often brought up in a kind of commune, and they would take showers together so that nudity was not a problem of any sort, and they thought of each other the way little children do in the family with their little brothers and little sisters. What the sociologists discovered was that once they got through puberty and started looking for a mate and falling in love, they didn't fall in love with each other. They had to go outside and fall in love with somebody else. There's a kind of extension of the incest taboo about not only, well, I guess it is an incest taboo with a sibling, the way the incest taboo is usually with a parent and child, so that the peer love wouldn't automatically issue into the later phase of love. That was why I thought of that. Because as children, they might have had this peer love. They just, because they lived together so intimately. But that wouldn't necessarily, or wouldn't cause, statistically, issue into their loving in a more mature sense. So this is a complication in any stage theory. I don't think I'd take it very far, incidentally. Did any of you who are more scientific than me get ideas about how you could do it better? I'm sure you could.
Well, I understood it.
Veronica? Yes.
I see it more as being that because you experience pure love, then you are able to move on to the next stage, but not necessarily with the same person. Is that what you're saying? Or no?
I mean, it's a necessary condition, but not sufficient. That may be a way of handling it. That without pure love, you'll find it very hard to have mature love, but it's no guarantee that you would or would not. But it's just that it's a necessary condition for the mature love. That might be, well, that's a weaker condition, but that may be all that one can say of this.
So the way I read about those kibbutzes, they're called?
Yeah. Kibbutz.
I read them in the context of an article that was actually talking about this phenomenon called genetic sexual attraction.
Who was the author of that?
I don't recall.
I've
been reading on the internet a couple months ago.
There are several by a man I met.
Okay.
I think they're classic now.
Maybe phenomenon where a mother who's separated from her son at birth, for example, right, gave him up for adoption or something, and they're reunited many years later, in some sort of disturbingly high statistical sense, like there's some kind of sexual attraction between them when they meet. And so this article was talking about this from a psychological perspective, that genetically there seems to be some kind of circuitry or something that can sort of like deactivate like the sexual attraction when there's sort of that peer or that mother-son relationship through the youth.
That's interesting. I didn't know about that research.
Yeah.
That's related to my emphasis upon self-love as being the fundamental stage of love. That without that there is no love. It's my reaction against the what was common when I started out writing about love, the idea that love means self-sacrifice, the ability to sacrifice yourself for somebody else being a definitive condition for there to be love. And as against that, it seemed to me that without self-love, there won't be any kind of love, and in a complete, mature, harmonious, happy, very successful love, there has to be a great deal of selfishness or it isn't going to work. In the first volume of the trilogy, I attack Freud all over the place. He was the great man into which I was born on these subjects. And so it was natural for me to deal with him and since my views are different, to attack him. What I attacked him for was his ignorance of the idea of bestowal, that he always seemed to emphasize appraisal as the method of analysis, which made it all look very mercantile and businesslike, as if you sort of add up the attractions, what can she bring into the relationship? If she doesn't have enough to offer, she isn't beautiful enough, smart enough, clever enough, I mean, intelligent enough, from a good family, all that, how can I love her, right? I don't mean that, in a sense, does Freud an injustice, because this theory is far more sophisticated than that. But the idea of bestowal is a way of creating value through your attachment, meaning being an important part of human nature, that he didn't seem to me to get it. By the time I got to the third volume, which is on the 20th century, in which there is a 70-page chapter, that 70-page chapter I mentioned to you, I had changed, or I began to appreciate how much more Freud had done in the world than I had, because I was somewhat considerably older, and I began to see all of the ways in which there was a great deal of wisdom in his ability to show how important appraisal is in human relations. And that had an effect on that volume, partly because the first volume had been misinterpreted by even friendly critics in thinking that I defined love as bestowal, which I don't, because I don't believe in defining words like love. But I emphasized bestowal less than appraisal. In the third volume, I wanted to remedy that, and there was Freud, who was so shrewd about all these different forms of appraisal. So I balanced it better, I think, in that than I had before. But also it fits in with this idea in the stage theory of self-love being fundamental at every stage, because through self-love you are appraising. Self-love, of course, is ambiguous. Do you want to get into that ambiguity? Well, before that, just 1 minute. If I'm going to appraise another person, I do it in terms of what she is worth to me. So that's a form of self-love. Now let's get into the distinction.
I didn't get the distinction from self-love. You mean...
Does self-love mean the same as selfishness on my view?
Oh, no.
That was the ambiguity I had in mind.
Okay. Self-love is different from selfishness, because through self-love we can love other people, and with selfishness we are just looking for our own good,
right,
and not for the good of the other person.
So if by self-love you mean seeing things from your own point of view and accepting yourself and loving yourself, which will involve some certain, I mean, you will get things that you need out of the other person through appraisal and through a kind of minimal selfishness at least, that seems to me to be a prime condition for there to be love. So self-love, I think, is the foundation, but it doesn't have to be selfishness, right?
Because selfishness, as you say, is pejorative.
That's right. It means getting more for yourself than for somebody else.
Yes.
Whereas, this is something Aristotle points out, I don't know if I mentioned that, he has the concept of the magnanimous man, the man who is so sure of himself and so confident and so strong, and right, that he can be gracious and he can tolerate all sorts of other people getting what they want, but he does it because he loves himself with such completeness and with such good judgment. Now that's the magnanimous man. That's what I mean by the one who has true self-love, and that's fundamental, because if you really hate yourself, you won't be able to love anybody.
But I think that it's also important to distinguish that level of self-love with the self-love that makes us love ourselves and accept ourselves, but also seek for the improvement of ourselves, and that way seek for love in other persons.
As opposed to selfishness. Mm-hmm. Right. No, I think that's right. In a sense, that's also what Plato meant, because Plato meant that if a lot of Plato on love comes out in the Republic as well as Symposium and the Phaedrus, and the Republic is about the construction of an ideal society. And his point is that if you do the right thing, then you won't care about being selfish in all the petty ways. If you pursue the good, you will be ready to sacrifice yourself. So everything you do is for your own self-worth, Plato would say, but that doesn't mean that you'll try to acquire more wealth. You'll be selfish in other ways. So that there is a relationship between that idea in Plato and what I was trying to say. More immediately, however, it's what I was trying to say had its roots in Nietzsche's idea of the Superman. The Superman is so strong and confident and creative that he doesn't have to be selfish. He shows himself forth. What Nietzsche was saying was not, as you'll see when we get to talk about Nietzsche, not what the Nazis thought, that the Superman is superior to everyone else, so he trounces them and subjugates them and enslaves them and destroys them. And they used the word Superman, Übermensch, because they wanted to use Nietzsche as a kind of credentials for themselves, but it's the opposite of what Nietzsche meant. He meant by the Superman the most creative person, and that for Superman is not the military person, but the artist. So it's that the authentically Nietzschean idea that inspired me. Also, I was inspired by primatology, which I was studying at that time along with my wife. And I don't know if you've ever watched documentaries about a baboon colony, a tribe of baboons. Well, it is run like a military dictatorship. There is an oligarchy of 3 powerful males who run everything, and among the 3 there's one that is the dominant male for the whole troop, which means that he gets the best food and the choice females. In other words, his genes go on, and he is kept alive for that purpose. As he gets weak, the other members of the oligarchy who are always snipping at him and attacking him, like in Parliament or in Congress, it's a political situation. Once he gets weak enough, they get rid of him. They drive him away, right? But while he is a dominant male, and you see in these documentaries, when he walks in front of through the troop, all the juveniles scurry out of his way. The women cower. Everybody makes room for him. He is the creative person who shows forth his love and self-confidence. And then, of course, if the troop is attacked, he takes the lead and he fights and sometimes gets killed. He has a function of that military sort, so he has to pay for being so self-confident, but in the meantime he shows forth this love of himself. And I stand in admiration and awe of that, and think that that's what love involves, not self-sacrifice, not the Christ-like figure who dies to take the sins away from other people. And the idea of sacrifice being not only Christian, but also pervading the Western world, and in other cultures too, as an evidence of love. For me, that's not true. For me, love starts out as this love of self, and then develops in all sorts of different ways, one of which might involve self-sacrifice. If you love your country, just out of a love of your own dignity and position in the society, you may risk your life, or even give your life, like men in the World War, who sometimes were in a group with their comrades, and a grenade was thrown in, and the individual would throw himself on the grenade, so he would get killed to prevent all the rest of them from getting killed. And that's a love that I really think is great, wonderful sign not only of heroism, but of love, a love of his people, a love of everything. Speaking of this, I just thought of suicide bombers. maybe what they do has to be thought of as love too.
You also mentioned that we have to love ourselves before loving humanity, or before being able to love our country.
Not necessarily temporally. I mean, this is an analysis. But usually, I mean, you don't start, the babies don't start out loving anything. So it might be temporal too. But it was the use of the word before that I was wondering about. Anyhow, go on.
But for the suicide bombers, I think that I wouldn't call it love, because they get brainwashed from the beginning, and I don't think that they really are doing it for the love of an ideal. I think they are just doing it because that is what is expected of them.
Who knows? I mean, probably it's a mixture. Some that way, some others. Some of them may be psychotic, who are going to commit suicide anyhow, and so they're, in a sense, they're told, look, you're going to kill yourself. Why don't you do us a favor? We can use you. I mean, it surely must include a great number of different elements, but I don't want to rule out the possibility of a Joan of Arc who will give herself for her people.
Well, I mean,
the myth of Joan of Arc was that, you know, the reality is more complicated with her too. Adriana? I feel you should be able to answer that.
Yes, but it's different because she, for example, Joan of Arc had an ideal, and she fought for that ideal, and her love for that ideal made her sacrifice her life and give her life for it. But I don't think that suicide bombers have such a clear idea of what they're doing.
I don't know. I've never known a suicide bomber.
Well,
There must be some of them who are idealistic.
well,
And there are people, I mean, particularly in the present war, have often suffered so much that they feel they should do their utmost and this is it. The suicide bombers, the great suicide bombers that I grew up with, are the kamikaze aviators in the Second World War. You know, the Japanese kamikaze, you know what they
You know about to draw a distinction, right, between the suicide bombers who blow up a nightclub, right, and the ones who will, you know, attack like a military and stuff like that. I think there's a distinction there.
Oh no, I'm not denying any distinction. It's beyond the level of question of love. I mean, you might say that it's unwise or immoral. Love isn't always moral. You know, that might be, but again, one doesn't know quite what the motives are. But in the case of the kamikaze Japanese, there was no sympathy with them in America. They were all said to be sort of bizarre creatures who were brainwashed and were out of their minds. I'm sure that in many cases they were just heroes. They're just heroic. And if there were 2,000, they had 2,000 who got killed that way, and they nearly destroyed the American fleet. If they had had 10,000, the Japanese would have won the war. So they were heroic.
If you relate that to the person who dies on the hand grenade, the person who dies on the hand grenade does so to save the men around him, which is just what the kamikaze fighters were doing, because if you sink a battleship, how many more lives of your men is that going to save?
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of the same mentality.
I was going to say about suicide bombers. I think that they do have ideals. I mean,
Some of them.
most of them. I think all of them have the ideal. I mean, whichever ones you take, the ones in Iraq or the ones in I don't know, in Israel or wherever, they have an ideal of. I guess they see themselves as freedom fighters, and they have an ideal of either I don't know, making a Palestinian state or making it some sort of different Iraq than now. So they're not just brainwashed. I mean, they've reached a point. I mean, it's been proven that most of them are just normal people. They're not, crazy people who are in mental institutions.
Who hath measured the ground? How do you know that?
Well, I mean, I've seen lots of reports, mostly on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, that they've said that they're just, family members, like a father of a family and stuff. I mean, they're not people who are in an asylum. That's what I'm saying. They're not crazy officially.
No, but Adriana's idea of brainwashing didn't mean that they were psychotic. They had been brainwashed. That's different from what I don't know. I just don't know what the figures are on this.
Well, I mean, I don't. I mean, brainwashed by somebody. I find it hard to believe. Brainwashed by what they see happening around them, yes. But brainwashed, there's some authority that goes around and brainwashes people as they did to the Hitler Youth. I don't think that really happens. I just think they're brainwashed. I mean, when they see, their brother killed or whatever, they see a bunch of casualties that are related to them, or they see that their dream of whatever dream they have is just, totally being stomped on, and they see that may be a sort of brainwash, but I don't want to call it brainwash. I want to call it more as, I mean, I guess you can't really call it brainwash. It's more you're becoming desperate.
Okay. Why don't we stop there? Next week, there is the chapter on religious love and the concluding 2 chapters. Who would like to give the presentation? I think Adriana, like Veronica, did a very good job. And so who would like to continue the tradition? Okay. One thing that in the chapter on love and society we didn't get to is the distinction between the analysis of compassion, of love of country. We touched on, beginning to touch on it here. We could begin there if you want, and then that quickly enters into religious love, as I mentioned at the end of the chapter. And that aspect of compassion of Buddhism I find very beautiful and attractive. If anyone knows more about Buddhism, this would be a good time to think about that. So, do we meet next week, or when is the holiday?
Well, it is the week after.
The
week after. So we do meet next week.
And then the holiday is after that. All right, so next week, good.
Columbus Day?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 2 weeks. Apparently that's 2 weeks off.
So it's
Good, then I'll see you there. I'm delighted.
We had no suicide day on September either.
I'm delighted with the work you're doing and reading the book. So I'll see you then. Thank you. Thank you.